everybody, welcome. Welcome to the Maccabi Sports Show. We're always glad to be with you every other week with some great guests. There's a lot been going on in the world of sports. Of course, we couldn't have a sports show without talking about the Super Bowl. And what'd you think?
Did everybody enjoy it? I tell you, Donna, the build-up for that game was so big. And, you know, I'm sure we got some Bucs fans probably on the Zoom here, but I have to say it was a little disappointing, you know.
Gosh. Oh, Arnie, disappointing what? You know, I just read that the ratings were the lowest in a while, which actually, Lou, I'm really surprised because I thought they said it was a blowout. Seeing that I am like a Tom Brady fan, I didn't even notice it was a blowout. I didn't even notice that the game wasn't close. I enjoyed it so much that I thought it was great. We had pizza and wings, and what could be bad on a Sunday night?
It was good. It was good. Like Super Bowl, it's hard to make a Super Bowl bad. And, you know, the thing is that I think everybody stayed with the game because we all believed Mahomes was coming back. You know, how can this quarterback who's, you know, at the top of his game not bring the Chiefs at least competitive? But it was a tough game. That offensive line for Kansas City was so hurt that it probably wasn't a true reflection. Lou, I want to ask you a question. I know you're a Blue Devil.
Yeah, so tough day today.
Yeah, so one of the big issues I know in college basketball right now is what are they going to do about conference tournaments? You know, some conferences are talking about eliminating them, but they're concerned because of their television contracts. Some are talking about maybe only bringing the teams that'll be eligible for the NCAA tournament. You got any thoughts, any opinion what college basketball should do?
Yeah, you know, I'll back up for a second and just, you know, the most extraordinary thing about the Super Bowl was they were able to play the whole season and finish on time and without, you know, relatively speaking, without major disruptions. And I think, you know, college basketball, as much as you're seeing some disruptions with individual teams, they're still able to play out the season, which I think is extraordinary. And I suspect you'll see the same when you get to conference tournaments. I think they'll find ways to keep the teams separated from each other. I don't think you'll see many, if any, fans in the stands for those games. But at that point, you're playing that for TV. You're not playing that for the ticket revenue. And I think, look, I think they'll go forward. They're having incredible success. Certainly more than I would have suspected, having lived through what we lived through planning for the U.S. Open and all the fears that we had. I suspect that you're going to see the conference tournaments played out, and you'll see the NCAA tournament played out. And,
I think that'll be. I'm looking forward to that. Should we mention, Mr. Dookie, that the Duke UNC game was the lowest rated game since 2008? Should I mention that both Duke and UNC are not rated college basketball teams?
Duke, UNC, Kentucky, and Kansas are all not rated, which is extraordinary. And I see my good friend Brad Corman's on this call. Our Dukies went down again today.
Tough year, Lou. It's a tough year.
At least it was a 4:30 game. You didn't have to stay up to watch the loss. So
barely.
Let me do this then. Wait, I should say this. If we're going to talk about college basketball, let's talk about the best game of last night. Number 1 versus number 2. University of Connecticut versus South Carolina was on Fox FS1. By the way, 5x in ratings on that women's game. Yep. Overtime, Connecticut pulls it out 63-59.
I don't have her name, but apparently they've got a superstar on Connecticut now. Maybe Becker or something.
Yeah, very good. Very good. Breckley. But let me just say this does go home to the Maccabi family because Aaliyah Boston, who was the rookie of the year in the women's side, is a sophomore. She plays for them. She was a star player for Coach Sherry Levin, who's coached a couple of our open teams. So there were only 30 fans in the stands last night at Connecticut, and Sherry was one of them. So I was getting some very close play-by-play, which is kind of great. Let me introduce everybody to you, Lou, if I could. We already know that you went to Duke and how much we all do love Duke. You have been in the sporting industry in different ways for a lot of years. I shouldn't say that. That would be unfair. You're looking fantastic. But you began at Wilson Sporting Goods. You became a vice president of client partnerships at Time Warner Global Marketing. I don't know why I didn't put this together. but you served as a senior vice president of marketing partnerships at MSG for both sports and entertainment. And
Yeah.
like, I maybe because I just feel like everyone I know worked at MSG at one point or another. It's almost like a rite of passage sort of for Jimmy Dolan. And if you can get through working for Jimmy Dolan, who I know is not on this feed tonight, then you earn your stripes, and anyone in the industry will hire you, right?
And you get over the wall and you never look back. I can tell you that for sure.
Totally. But you started working for the USTA like 10 years ago. Can you
Yes.
believe how fast that went? And now everyone should know that Lou is the Chief Revenue Officer for the USTA. He's an amazing guy. I think Alana Kloss came on. He's a champion for equity. And he does a great job, and really had a big role in making sure that the US Open happened this past year. You were one of the first sports, actually,
Yep.
that had to deal with the pandemic. The NBA bubble was in effect at that point in time, but you had a much different matrix to deal with. Tell us a little bit about that. Let's start there.
Yeah, I think, for us, we were the first international competition of any scale that came back. And so the real challenge that we had to face that was different than most of the team sports that could exist in the bubble is we had 500 athletes coming from all over the world that we had to get into the country first, get them safely quarantined, bring in their entourages, as many as we could allow. And so for us, that was for many, many months, the biggest challenge that we had to overcome, working with the State Department and the state of New York to allow us to bring these athletes in from all over the world, and to do so with enough time to allow them to prepare and be ready. A little different. We were talking just before the call started, a little different than what you're seeing in Australia now. Australia is focused on keeping their populations safe and shielded from the athletes. Our focus was always on getting the athletes in and keeping them safe, and just making sure that they could play safely, that we weren't doing anything that would negatively impact the health of our region. So we weren't taking tests away from the public, those sorts of things, and that we wanted to put on an event that was in the best interest of our sport, right? That would represent our sport well. We are the biggest celebration in the game, and if it didn't feel like a legitimate competition, we weren't doing a service to the sport of tennis. Thankfully, we were able to do all that. We had a great partnership with the state, with the county. Our sponsors and our broadcasters were all incredibly flexible and supportive, and we were able to make it happen. But unfortunately, with no fans in attendance, we're looking at a new scenario now with maybe a few fans or social distance fans. That adds a whole new level of complexity, because you had the opportunity to keep all the players separate. And now we're talking about commingling fans and players in the same environment. How do you make that work? So.
Arnie's going to ask you a question, but
Yeah.
Did you have to sleep at the stadium, or did you get to go home?
We had we had two designated hotels that staff stayed in, and then we had a player hotel out on Long Island where the players were quarantined. They had to stay there. They could go back and forth to the tennis center, but that was it. So we were there. Now we were on our own recognizance. So I was driving back and forth across the street, but it was, I think, 31 days in LaGuardia airports.
Wow.
Hey, Lou, you have a great background in the sports business area. A few questions. Number one, did you always want to be in the sports industry? And also, you kind of started your career with Wilson instead, and I think you managed the golf division in Tokyo. What was it like as kind of a young person starting out in the industry and being in Tokyo? And somebody on the Zoom tonight wanted you to comment on what was it like being a Jewish person in Tokyo during those years?
So the beginning of the question, in terms of did I always want to be in sports, I would say yes, and then no, and then yes again. So Brad, who's on the call, will tell you in college, my interest was to work in sports. My belief was that if I was going to be successful, I ought to be in an industry that I could be excited about, could be passionate about. I started out in marketing, but I wanted to work in sports, and was afforded a tremendous opportunity to go into a general management training program at Wilson Sporting Goods right out of Duke's graduate school, and start there. And what I learned after about 2 or 3 years was it wasn't about working in sports any longer, that the novelty starts to wear off. And if you're not genuinely energized and excited about the business challenges and the job every day, right? It wasn't going to work. And thankfully, I started to get more and more excited about what I was doing at work, less about the perks of getting to go to events or being on the practice tee at Augusta and those sorts of things. And was just genuinely excited about the challenges of growing the business. And that then freed me up to look at a lot of other opportunities. It was later in my career that I started to sort of think about, can I now sort of get back into that environment, but take what I've learned in other industries and get back into sports? And that's sort of when I ultimately ended up at Madison Square Garden. So I was gone for, almost 12, 14 years before I came back into sports again. The Japan experience was incredible. I was early in my career, 27 or so, 28 years old, and was asked to go run our golf business for Wilson in Asia, headquartered out of Japan. We had a CEO at the time, a gentleman named John Riccatello, who went on to run EA Sports.
I know, John. Are you kidding
So
me?
John's belief was that Wilson Sporting Goods had more opportunity to grow its business outside the U.S., where the brand wasn't necessarily as tarnished or as stodgy or old as it appeared sort of in the U.S. So went over and did that. The expat experience over there in a country where you don't look like anybody else, you don't speak the language, right? I had 3 weeks of immersion before I left, and then 2 hours of language classes every day while I was there, was extraordinary, because not just the business side of it, which was new, and learning that culture, which was very different, but just you got satisfaction every day, right? Using a word you hadn't used before, figuring out how to navigate your way in a cab. So it was incredibly gratifying. I worked with some wonderful people who in Japan operate entirely differently than we do here in the US. Where in the US, it's about acknowledging individuals and recognizing, taking risks and recognize individuals who are successful. There, you can't call out anybody for exceptional performance. It's all about the team. It's the collective. They work incredibly hard. It was a great experience. The experience in Tokyo as a Jew, I won't say it really made a difference, right? It was that only existed within the expat community that I was in, and so there were some friends. We'd celebrate the holidays at the Tokyo American Club while we were there, but religion in Japan isn't necessarily a big factor. At least now I'm going back years in their society. It's a very different.
So Lou, I didn't realize that John Riccatello ran Wilson. That's amazing. Yep. So you've gotten to see a lot of people when you work in sports. That's one of the cool things. We have this great kid, Brandon's up there. There he is. You can see him smiling. Yeah. He's looking for his first internship. He wants to work in sports. Actually, his mother's our tennis chair for the Maccabi games. So Brandon, you're listening closely, right, Brandon?
Yes, and my mom is actually on this call as well.
Oh, Stacy is. There you go, because she's a tennis person, right? Let me just ask you this. So you've gotten to be in a lot of places, and you've met a lot of people in sports. What stands out for you?
In terms of hiring or getting into it?
You can pick the category, but we're all little kids in the world of sports. Let's face it, doesn't matter how old we are. And there are situations we get and we're like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here, or I can't believe I'm talking to this athlete. You probably don't care that you get to talk to Serena, but I think that's incredibly cool. Of course, for me, my favorite player is Alana Kloss. So yeah.
So I'll try to answer it a few different ways. So in terms of when I get the most excited, I think early in my career at Wilson, I was given the job of babysitting John Daly, the golfer, early in his career as a golfer. And I may not have been the best choice to be babysitting anybody at that time, but that was one of the most fascinating and exciting experience. He was at his peak. He had just won the PGA Tour or the PGA Championship. We signed him, and it was just what I would equate to sort of a rock star existence. And the guy hated to fly and had his custom mobile home, and we'd be sitting outside his mobile home, drinking beer and grilling steaks in parking lots across the street from his golf club. That was a great experience to be close to an athlete, an unusual athlete that was just interesting and fascinating. Alana is extraordinary on this call. One of the traits for me in my career in sports has been the opportunity to not only work with Alana, but also to work with Billy and to engage directly with Billie Jean King and be able to be inspired and talk about common issues and things that we're trying to do together, for me is just, unmatched by anything I've been able to do professionally. She is such an extraordinary, both Alana and Billy have just incredible positivity and if the one thing you can't do is figure out a way to say no to either of them, because they will never accept it. And I learned so much just being in their presence. And for me, I would say that's been a real standout in 10 years working in the tennis business, to have that opportunity, because that impacts me. It impacts my life in a much bigger way.
That's awesome. Arnie's going to be on your list soon by the end of this
Yeah.
call. Just want fair warning.
I love it.
Lou, I get to live that little kid feeling every other Tuesday when I'm with Donna Orton. I just want everybody to know that.
Yes.
I want to ask you a little bit. I mean, you've had such a great career again in sales and marketing in the business of sports. Talk a little bit how the business has changed. I know when I started my career, when you gave a sponsor signage, it was all about branding. They love branding. And obviously it's turned to much more direct return on investment now, what you provide. But talk about the general landscape of kind of sponsorship and sales and marketing and how it's changed during the course of your career.
Yeah, it's gotten a lot harder. It's gotten a lot more complicated. It's much more difficult, much more competitive. There are so many choices. Early on, you're right. It was often about selling a sign and hospitality to an executive who liked your sport and wanted to play golf, wanted to be in the pro-am, right? It wasn't about return on investment. It was really about the perception of being around athletes or being around an event that others were excited about. And, hard work, you could outwork folks and be successful just on more sales calls. And a lot was left to chance that the athletes would sort of take care of the rest, and you just had to provide that stage. Today, you have brands that are much more conscious on how they invest their money. They try to be objective about where they're spending, whether it be sport, entertainment, anything else. They want to reach their audience. They want to do it now in an authentic way that doesn't feel like they're just there as wallpaper in the background, that they're connected to the game, to the players, to the fans in some way, which puts the burden on the good properties, those that are really effective at selling, to figure out how to make that link for them, because they're not necessarily going to come up with that on their own. And the biggest issue today, and Donna knows this, she lives in this world, the biggest issue for us today is how do you take advantage of digital media? You're competing with your own athletes and their social media followings. How your event is being broadcast, and is it streamed? Is it airing on linear? That whole mix is starting to change. And you don't have control of the platforms necessarily. There are avid fans today, and Brendan probably knows this and would fall into this category. You can be an avid fan of a sport and never sit and watch a 3-hour game, right? You're gonna get highlights on social media. You're gonna look up stats, right? I see it with my kids, right? The idea that they would sit and watch a full game uninterrupted doesn't exist any longer. But years ago, we would have said those people aren't fans. But they may be more avid, consuming more content around the sport. But it may be the athlete's content, it may be yours, it may be some third party that you have no control over. So it's much more complicated today. There are so many levers and levers that you don't control as the owner of the team, of the league, of the event.
Right. You mentioned Alana, but I need to tell you this, Lou, but we invited Alana to come to the Maccabi games in 22 in Israel. And she said yes. And so I'm sure she'd want you to come with us too. We think that you should. It's one of the great experiences you'll ever have. I'm just going to say. I mean, it's better than being on the practice range at Augusta. I'm just going to tell you from personal experience. And we want to shout out to all of our tennis leadership from Maccabi USA who are on the call. Marie Rudin, Stacy, Slavka, Andrea. You know what? Chiquiano. Sounds like a prayer. Marty Bloom and Aaron Wolf, they're all on this call. So we should talk a little bit more about this, okay, when you get a chance. In the meantime, Nancy Alterman would like to know, pickleball, it's the latest sensation. Is it additive to what's going on in tennis, or will it take away? What are you seeing?
You know,
We need a pickleball tournament at the Maccabi games. Do we not have one yet? Okay, go ahead.
it's really interesting. So early in my career at the USTA, as pickleball was just coming into view, the feeling was that it was somehow competitive, and we tried to stay away from it. And I would say about 5 years ago, we had a change of heart and realized that anytime you get a racket in somebody's hands, it can be a transitional sport in either direction. Tennis might bring you to pickleball. Pickleball might bring you to tennis. The biggest miss as it relates to pickleball is that when they were setting their courts, we weren't working with them together and figuring out dimensions that could be played on existing tennis courts. Whether you went sideways and put a net, whatever the case may be. You may have seen there's some junior size courts now where we add double lines on shorter courts for kids under 10. And the problem that presents is you now ask the club owner to have to make a choice. Am I going to use this real estate for a tennis court? Am I going to use it for a pickleball court? I can't multi-purpose it. And I think that's the shame in everything, because had that happened, you would have an infinite number of pickleball courts that people could play. As a club or an owner, I have the opportunity to flex that court to whatever my guests want to use. It's a much more lucrative if we had figured that out. And unfortunately, that course seems to have left the stable. I don't know that we'll be able to adjust it. But we're adding pickleball courts to our USGA national campus. So I think we're embracing the sport now.
Nancy,
Donna, can I add something to that? It's Marty and Marshall knows. I was trying to get the pickleball in the Maccabi games for next year, but I think it was voted down. But Israel is playing it a lot. Right now I'm in Anguilla, and I have a son and grandson live there. So we could have had 3 teams already to play. And just to follow on what you just commented, we have pickleball courts here in Anguilla that are superimposed on the tennis court.
Mhm.
You can, there's a certain material that you can do. And also pickleball court is much cheaper to do without the nets and rackets, all the rest cheaper.
Yeah.
But I just asked you 2 questions. We lived in Hong Kong in the 70s, and we represented Wilson for sporting goods. Were you there in that era?
No, I didn't start until the late 80s and was in Japan 95, 96.
Okay, and just to talk about, by the way, Japan, someone I think was only raised the point, there's a very interesting book written called The Fugu Plan. The Japanese, before the war and then during, thought Roosevelt was Jewish and that the Jews were very good luck. So they did not persecute the Jews in the war. And a rabbi who was there wrote a very interesting book. And if you're interested, it's something to do. And if I may be so bold, also ask you a question.
Yeah.
What do you see as the marketing potential, or is there one, between the USTA and Maccabi for tennis, say at the Open or you at Maccabi? Could you see joint things happening?
you go, Marty. You go, Marty. I love it. Come on, what's the answer to that? Good job, Marty. And by the way,
Sure.
Marty, if you went for
Let's start.
kosher pickleball, I bet you would have gotten past. Go ahead, Lou.
Let's start with the shirt. The challenge we have at the USTA is that our charter, our bylaws are, we are about promoting the game in the US, right? That is, our focus is entirely developing players in the US. We've explored, should we put academies in China and start to build a new generation of players there that don't exist, other places, other countries. And we're just, our bylaws don't allow us to make any investments outside the United States. We exist as a nonprofit to grow the game here. So we'd have to figure out a linkage. Happy to find ways to sell tickets and bring folks over from Israel to the US or use the facility for an event. Certainly we can do that. But in terms of growing the game over there, I've been involved through Sports for Youth with Donna with some organizations that are using tennis over
Yep.
there to improve relations between Palestinian kids, Arab kids, and Jewish kids, because tennis is one of the sports where there's no physical contact. You're social distanced. It seems to be set up nicely to try to do that. But in my USTA role, we're sort of limited to what we can do to improve the game in the US and bring the sport to kids who otherwise wouldn't have the opportunity on their own to play.
Hey Lou, we're going to have Danny Sordowski from Maccabi reach out to you at some point, because we started our own Maccabi corporate sponsorship program, so
Okay.
we can use that help. I want to ask you, I heard you say something that was really cool. You once said that the US Open is the bake sale for everything that the US Open does. I thought that was a great line. I think what the US Open brings in around 400 million, I think somewhere in that area. Talk a little bit about, where that money goes. You have so many different arms and divisions and things that you do with.
It goes to Alana Kloss.
It does, okay. But over and above Alana's share, tell us where those revenues go to.
There's not much left, but what we do have.
I mean, this is brutal.
The Open Fund is the economic engine that drives our organization. We're very fortunate. It's a major event. It generates tremendous financial results that we can invest back into growing the game. It goes to court construction. We're typically involved in building anywhere or subsidizing the construction of 1,500 to 3,000 courts a year, public courts in underserved communities. It goes to school programs, park and rec programs, equipment for after school. We have a network of 250 or so youth organizations, after school programs around the country called National Junior Tennis and Learning. Was founded by Arthur Ashe. There's a couple 100,000 kids that participate in that. It's a way for tennis to teach broader life skills, sort of in inner city environments. We're providing equipment for that. We're subsidizing instruction in parks and rec programs for kids to get in. And then we're sanctioning all the competition that is happening around the country, whether it be the 12 and unders, the 90 and overs, father, daughter, mother, son, all of that stuff that's happening around the country as well. So it never goes as far like anything else. It never goes as far as you'd like it to go. And we're focused on continuing to grow, but it's a very different experience than, as Donna will know, from working for Jim Dolan and Madison Square Garden, for example, and where those dollars go, right? You feel good that it's being invested back into something that's improving the quality of life in this country and helping individuals be healthy and active.
Hey, Donna, can I ask just Lou one quick follow-up? Talk a little bit about, and especially given what's occurred in this country over the last year with racial justice, talk about the USTA's efforts to kind of build the interest in the game in the African-American community and other minority communities. And is that a priority of the organization right now?
Yeah, very much so. Alana could probably speak to it even better than I could, but we're very proud of what tennis has accomplished as a sport. If you think back and talk about Alana and Billy, we've had equal prize money at the US Open going back 50 years. And there is no other sport of any scale that has achieved the level of gender parity that exists in tennis. And not to say that it can't be improved still, but no one has achieved that level. I think 9 out of the 10 highest paid athletes, female athletes in the world are tennis players. I think we've done well on that front. We have a long way to go, and that's a tribute to the impact that Billy had with her other members of the original 9, the 8 other members of the original 9 that started the women's tour. It's a reflection on what they've been able to do. And we've just had, as a sport, we've had effectively a 30-year head start on the WNBA and women's soccer and other sports that are still in these conversations, having these fights, which is extraordinary to think about. Our mission as an organization is to grow the game and make it look like America, make sure it looks like America. And from a demographic standpoint, we continue to invest into our NJTL program, which is underserved communities, trying to bring more diverse participants into the game. As a sport, I think we've been more welcoming, certainly a long way to go, but more welcoming to the LGBTQ plus community. And so we take great pride in that. When you step on the grounds at the US Open, it's the Billie Jean King National Tennis Center. It's Arthur Ashe Stadium. And while they were both incredible champions on the court, right, they were selected to have their names on our facility because of the impact they've had in society at large. And it's not just about winning titles, it's about the larger impact that those two in particular have had on our society and society as a whole. So it's an important value for us. I think we still have a long, long way to go to get it right. I feel good about what we've accomplished, but much like almost any other aspect of life here in our country, right, there's still a long way to go to nail it. But if you look, particularly on the women's side in our game, if you look at, you know, the history of players of color and today the number of, you know, Sloane Stephens and Venus and Serena and Coco Gauff and Madison Keys, and you've got sort of a lineage there. You know, one of the disappointing things on golf, if you think about the opportunity that was afforded to us through Tiger Woods, and unfortunately you can't point to necessarily any progress on that front, which is not a shot at him in any way, shape, or form. It's just somehow it didn't translate into participation.
Well, the first tee is pretty good, but why don't we talk about a little bit about the marketability of who's the hottest tennis players globally right now, and who's getting everyone's attention, and how about in the US?
Yeah, so, you know, I would say you can't go 15 minutes watching television not see Serena in a commercial. Serena,
Holy moly, she got more minutes on the Super Bowl. Holy moly, it was pretty awesome.
so Serena continues to be, is probably the #1 female athlete in terms of endorsement income. She may have just been passed this year by Naomi Osaka. And because she's got a huge Asian following and Japanese following, and is maybe one of a handful of Japanese athletes that have achieved that level of international stardom. And so she's benefited as a result of that. I would say those two. On the women's side, Coco Gauff is certainly someone that people have a lot of interest in. She's only 16, but you know, Naomi and Serena sort of exist on the women's side. And they could be earning more than, and probably earning more than anyone on the men's side. Federer certainly, right, has set a standard in terms of endorsements. He's done incredibly well. But there's a big drop off. Those three, there's a big drop off to whoever might be 4, 5, and 6, the Nadals and.
You mean
and
Diego Schwartzman's not up there in the sponsorship?
Unfortunately not.
We should tell them the story. So we're at the U.S. Open, not this year, the year before. And Nadal's playing. He's playing Nadal, and it's Diego Schwartzman. I'm like, come on, guys, Schwartzman. I'm like, Lou, this guy's got to be Jewish. And Lou's go, well, I think he's Jewish. I'm like, Lou, this guy's got to be Jewish. How many Jewish tennis players are on the USTA tour? And we found out like it was him,
yes.
Diego Schwartzman. So like we are overly committed to this guy.
All 5'6" of him. Yeah, it's incredible the success he's had. He's at points been a top 10, top 20 player.
He's great. I mean, he's great to watch. And then, but I heard there's a kid named Noah Rubin coming up.
Yeah, Noah Rubin trained under John McEnroe at his academy here in New York, and is, you know, one of a group of younger American guys. I think he's still in his early 20s. The top, probably the most exciting on the men's side American prospect right now is a 20-year-old kid named Sebastian Corda.
Oh yeah.
Whose sisters you may know, because he's got 2 sisters who are both on the LPGA tour, and he's now, I think, in close to the top 50 or about to break the top 50, and is having some great success. So there's a lot of excitement there for us within the organization. But it'd be great to see another American male player at the top of the sport. We've not had one for, I guess, since Andy Roddick was maybe the last #1.
Does that impact? Let me ask you this: a follow up here, Lou, Arnie. Does that impact your sales? Having Americans at the top of the list, being really marketable, does that impact what happens?
I get asked that question a lot. What I would say is it doesn't really impact the U.S. Open. The U.S. Open is more like an Olympic Games or a World Cup. It's the best players in the world, no matter where they're from, all in one place. And the U.S. Open will be fine. Where you see the impact is the smaller American events, not having American players who want to stay and play in the U.S. Right now, you have a European-dominated tour from the the men's side. And so the tournaments in Atlanta and Winston-Salem and Houston, don't get the benefit of top players because the Europeans don't want to spend that much time here in the US. So if you think back to when you had Agassi and Sampras and Courier and all these guys, Chang, all American, right? Every week they were playing somewhere in the United States, or every couple of weeks they were playing somewhere in the United States. That was great for the game because you could see the best all around the country. You don't have that. The PGA Tour has that in golf, but that's because the best players in the world, no matter where they're from, are here, living here year round and playing every event. Tennis doesn't work that way. They're spread all over the world. And so I think we suffer a bit there. But the US Open, we're fine. We joke, we have a championship every year, right? Teams struggle. The Knicks may go 20, 30, 40 years without a champ. We're playing a final every year, and we've got the best players in the world there performing. So
I got to tell you, Lou, now that we're talking players, I'm dating myself. I still remember the days of Harold Solomon, and
yes.
those days don't exist anymore. We sit in the backcourt and do ground strokes anymore. That was a different game those decades ago. I want to ask you about the new stadium. You all have put hundreds of millions of dollars into the National Tennis Center in the last few years. I know you put a retractable roof on there. Talk about what that's meant and why those enhancements were made.
We've spent over $700 million to upgrade the entire facility.
Wow.
The roof over Arthur Ashe is the most visible piece, but 95% of our campus has been either built from scratch or renovated, and it's a 42-acre campus. And so if you think about the US Open, when you're watching on TV, all you're really seeing is what's happening in Arthur Ashe, and the focus is on the court. But what has made us so successful as a sports event is that the Open really, it's a festival. We've got a 42-acre campus with 17 competition courts. We joke we're a food and wine festival with tennis at our core. And someone many years ago, long before me, had the realization that if it was just about the tennis and we were only appealing to tennis fans, we would never fulfill the commercial aspirations that we had as an organization. And if you think about it now, the US Open is one of those events that even if you don't like tennis, it's a nice day. You're going to go out. Our fans spend 8 hours on average on the grounds. That's half the time is spent watching tennis. The other half is dining, shopping, drinking, people watching. And so we've had to upgrade the facility to allow for all of that to happen. So the roof over Ashe is great. It assures that we can play, and we'll always have a television product. It doesn't deliver an extra dollar, but it does allow us to have schedule certainty. We built a new Louis Armstrong Stadium that also has a roof. And the reason having two is important is now you can advance players in pairs. So it's great that Federer got to play under a roof, but if his opponent didn't get to play that day, you've got nothing to show the next day. So you can advance players in pairs, and that helps us from a TV standpoint. It helps that fans can come out knowing that rain or shine, they're going to be able to watch tennis. But a lot of the money went into the grounds where we doubled our food concession areas. We doubled our retail space. We doubled our points of sale to allow for fans to move around more easily, to have more options in dining and restaurants. And it's all paid off incredibly well. Our per caps are through the roof. We're up to 850,000 tickets now over a 3-week window. That would be more than an NBA or an NHL or an NFL team would do in a season. So it's really set us up for another generation, 20 years of success.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything better than those outdoor courts in the early rounds where you're up close and personal, right, with the players, almost on the court with them?
You know, a general admission ticket can get you a front row seat, and you're watching two of the top 50 or 100 players on the planet competing at the same time. There isn't much like it. We have diehard fans who prefer that ticket, right? I just want a grounds pass. I want to, as opposed to, I need to be in Arthur Ashe. The more competitive matches, particularly early in the tournament, tend to be out there. We put the stars in Arthur Ashe, but their early round matches tend to be not uncompetitive, but you go out there, you'll see great players. Even the qualifying tournament, you've got some of the best players in the world playing, and you can come on the grounds for free and watch them play.
I love it. You guys have done an amazing job. The tennis spectacular, the venue's spectacular. But isn't the U.S. Open? Didn't you create the U.S. Open series, Leo? Weren't you involved in that?
We
What
did, and the goal there was to leverage the U.S. Open in many respects and our power with broadcasters to support and prop up some of the smaller events in the U.S. and North America. So after Wimbledon, when the players come back and start their hard court season, we were able to pull all of those events together, the 6 or 7 of them pulled together into something called the US Open Series. They're all on TV. Now they're on Tennis Channel Monday through Sunday. Every day you can watch tennis. It's the same surface as the US Open. They're playing with the same balls as the US Open. It gives us an opportunity to start to create something that feels like a season. One of the challenges with tennis, it's a long season. It's all around the world. As a fan, you can't really follow your team or your player in quite the same way you would if it was the NBA season or a Major League Baseball season. So it gives us a bit of a condensed season where we can build some anticipation for the Open. And more importantly, with our USTA hat on, it's allowed us to support and subsidize some smaller events that really on their own would have fought to get broadcast coverage or would have had to do time buys and struggle there. So having that real estate on TV helps their sponsorship business, helps build their visibility and their brand. So it's been quite effective, but that one's a little more altruistic than necessarily a USTA commercial strategy.
Hey, Lou, we have a question. I'm reading this from somebody in the chat. He said, how has COVID affected the U.S. junior tennis programs, as in tournaments held largely in a few southern states? And also, how has the lack of live attendance at the U.S. Open affected what you can do business-wise to support your other programs?
Yeah, so COVID's been interesting. For us, on the one hand, the questions about junior tournaments, all of that was shut down. It was shut down for months and months and months. A lot of the tournaments, the higher level tournaments, you're traveling, you might be flying to, right? All of that was closed for a long time. At the same time, tennis has been one of the probably biggest beneficiaries of any sport, with the exception of hiking, in terms of growth and participation. There were 4 million new players last year. Tennis participation grew 23%. Racket sales were up 50%. Ball sales were way up, right? It's the ideal social distance sport. You could go out and play. You're on opposite sides of the net. You could still take lessons, right? It's outdoors. So we've really benefited from a participation standpoint, but those junior tournaments and the junior circuits and things got shut down for a long time. They're back now and being played, but it's harder. Most of the national events have been shelved because we don't want people flying in to compete. So the challenge now is you've got to play more locally, and you've got to hope that there's enough competition available to you locally to help with your growth and the like.
Yeah.
No fans at the US Open changed the economics tremendously. So unlike the NBA, unlike the NFL, where TV is the dominant revenue driver for those businesses, tennis is fairly evenly split between tickets and hospitality, which is still, at least the US Open, which is still our number one line of business. Broadcast would be 2, sponsorship would be 3, and they're all fairly close to one another. So on the one hand, you like having that diversity, and that's appealing. On the other hand, in this COVID situation, your ticket and hospitality business went to 0, and your sponsorship business suffered because a big part of those fees are associated with engaging with fans on site, hosting your clients, and so we had cuts there. So our revenues were down probably 65%. Our profit was off by more than 80%.
Wow.
And part of that was we made a point of maintaining prize money at the level it had been the year before. And we felt it was important because players weren't getting the opportunities to play and to earn. We wanted to try to protect some of their income and give them that opportunity to earn, is not feel the pain that we were feeling financially. We could do that for a year. That's not a sustainable business model for us going forward. And as a result, we ended up reducing our staff by about 25%. We had to cut a lot of programs. We're hopeful that we'll be able to start building that back this year. But even right now, we're budgeting for what I would describe as a social distanced US Open, which would equate to about 30% capacity. We're hoping it'll be better. That improves our ticket business and improves our sponsorship, but it still probably yields about half of what a typical bake sale would yield for us at the Open.
You did a program that I thought was really brilliant that I read about. Obviously, all the companies in sports are affected by the pandemic and how they react on the business side. But you instituted a program called Ask Us Anything. Will you talk about that? I just thought it was so innovative and such a great idea.
Early on, you've really done your research. I'll say this: early on, we were struggling with how to communicate with our business partners, given all of the uncertainty. Right, weeks would go by, and we knew no more than we did before, or we thought it was one thing, and all of a sudden it was something else. And what I was starting to see in February and March was a lot of reporting that, quite honestly, was just completely erroneous, specious reporting. Where the U.S. Open's being relocated to Indian Wells. The U.S. Open's moved to Florida. They're going to play in October, November. And I was in every meeting. None of that was happening, was being discussed. And yet all of this was being reported. And we had all of our partners picking up the phone going, "How is this happening? You haven't talked to me." So we made a decision that the best thing that we could do was just try to be transparent as we possibly could with all of our business partners. And we set up a standing weekly video conference with all of our broadcast partners, all of our sponsors. There were about 80 people in total. And we would get on for an hour and update them on what was happening in our planning and answer every question. We wouldn't leave until every question had been answered. And the hardest part was there were weeks where we didn't know, and we had to admit, we just don't know. And we need you to just bear with us, and we're doing the best we can. And we were fearful that it might trigger a negative reaction because you're acknowledging that there are things out of your control and you just don't know. And our experience was the opposite was the case. Our partners were so appreciative of the access, of the transparency. They were going through it on their own in their own business. And so we're incredibly flexible with us and understanding. And so now we're looking at how does that transition in a go forward onto a permanent basis so that we are operating with our partners in the way you would want a family member or anyone else to deal with you, right? When this whole thing started, there were all sorts of articles on leadership and effective leadership and what Trump was doing wrong and all of that. But the big takeaway was, right, you've got to be visible and you've got to be accessible. And so we seized on that. And thankfully, I think it helped our business quite a bit. We had a much easier time negotiating settlements for the year than many of my colleagues at other properties were experiencing. And we think the goodwill that will be generated as a result on a go-forward basis will certainly help from a renewal standpoint. We're seeing that now.
So it's interesting, Lou, because you said that you are planning for a US Open 30% capacity, which is end of August into September, right?
That is, I would say that's our worst case scenario.
Uh-huh.
And we're planning for that. And at the same time, we're trying to maintain the flexibility to scale up at any point once we get the green light to do it. We have a wonderful medical advisory panel. We've got the head of infectious disease at Mount Sinai in New York is on it. That the chief medical officer of the NCAA is a part of our medical advisory group. And they're telling us we're very confident that by the time we get to the end of summer, between vaccinations, people who've already got the antibodies, rapid testing, we're going to be in a good place to allow more fans than that on site. Yeah. The problem we have is the state has to give us the green light to do it. Right. And they've got to give us enough advance notice that we can act on it. If, you know,
we're very tuned to this too, because, you know, we have our events not to 2022, but we have tryouts for all of our teams this summer. And, you know, we were talking about basketball tryouts earlier.
Yeah.
We're talking about the end of the summer. It's, you know, it was just, none of us know, right? We just don't know. There could be a flare up. We just don't know. Not to be a Debbie Downer here, but it's just so difficult to live in the ambiguity, right? Although I got some great advice recently. Just embrace the ambiguity, will be okay. I have to
Absolutely.
ask this question for Seth Goldberg because he's asked it more than once here. Will the USTA have more wheelchair tennis broadcast on TV like ESPN or CBS?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We're very proud of that we have the wheelchair competitions championships happening alongside the U.S. Open men's and women's and mixed and doubles competitions. In the U.S., we've not been as great about televising all of it. There are some broadcast partners who do broadcast all of those matches. Japan, in particular, shows every match. We're making a point this year of televising every one of those wheelchair matches and making those available. It'll likely be streamed. I'm not sure that ESPN will pick it up on the linear broadcast, but it'll certainly be available on ESPN Plus. That was a renewed commitment after last year that, again, we can figure out a way to broadcast all of it, and let's broadcast every match beginning to end. And so we'll do that now, not just a select amount of it.
Well, Seth, that should make happy because we have a great, we have wheelchair basketball, wheelchair tennis. We really have a lot of sports that involve.
No, there's an Israeli wheelchair tennis player who came and spoke to our Sports for Youth group.
Oh, that's right. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right. That's right.
Olympic.
Yeah.
Good.
But if I would have remembered, Seth, we could have shared that with you, but I forgot.
He was an Olympic
I have one
medalist.
I have one more question here, Arnie. That's it's about technology. Contactless, touch points, data analytics. We're seeing it across sports, and I think tennis has been a leader, much like the NBA. You guys, every time I show up there, you are championing something new. Josh's question is, how does tennis, do you think, compare to other sports' current progress on that front? And how have you seen its use evolve over your experience with the USTA?
I would say it's a little bit mixed. And the reason it's mixed is if you think of the US Open, we're sort of a 2-week pop-up event. Even though the facility is permanent, there's nothing else of any significance happening there throughout the year. And so for us, it's very hard to make the investments that a Madison Square Garden might make in a venue that's being operated 365 days a year with 270 events or something along those lines. We don't have the league, the NBA doing a lot of that work and then disseminating things out to teams and venues supporting us in that way. So we certainly have scale. And if you looked at $400 million in revenue and 850,000 fans, that would be bigger than almost any sports team you can think of. The Knicks aren't generating that, with the exception of probably some NFL teams, but we would be in the upper echelon of sort of an NBA team if you looked at us on comp. So we do invest quite a bit into our technology and our platforms. We're lucky that we have some sponsors. IBM would be the one I would point to first. A big part of their expression of our sponsorship is helping us deliver state-of-the-art experiences digitally, whether that be on our websites, our apps, or some of the venue and facility infrastructure. And so when I commented on authentic integrations and the like earlier, IBM may be one of the most authentic because they're driving our scoring systems. They're driving a lot of the technology around, and we're able to leverage their capability, which is far larger than we could ever do on our own. They also support Wimbledon. They also support Augusta. And so as a result, the 3 events are able to sort of work together on giving IBM direction about the technology that we think we need going forward. This year, I think you'll see a lot of emphasis on contactless payments. I'm not sure how Chase will feel about that, our banking partner, but certainly you're going to see that as a way to one, from a hygiene standpoint, and then also just as a way to facilitate throughput throughout. We went to all mobile tickets 2 years ago. That was a great success. We have a slightly older fan base, so sometimes new technologies are a little harder for us to introduce than you would see at many other sporting events, but we try to stay current. I think we try to be a quick follower, not necessarily the pioneer, because with a 2-week event, if we get it wrong, we can't fix it. If I get something wrong for opening day, I have weeks and weeks and weeks to get it right. But for us, if we don't get it right the first day, we've got a problem that we can't recover from, because the tournament's going to happen and we can't slow it down.
Hey Lou, we're kind of winding down the,
Yes.
the show. I want to ask you one serious question and just a fun one. But it seems like in the sport of tennis that a lot of the fan base is really enjoying kind of the team approach with World Team Tennis and Davis Cup. Davis Cup seems to have lost some oomph over the years. What, if anything, could be done to kind of bring that interest back in the U.S.? And my fun question to you is, I think the night matches at the Open are, truly, they're among the greatest events in all of sports. So when it's 1 a.m. in New York, players are off the court, the fans have left, and the lights are about to be turned off. You ever want to go out there with your racket and just take a couple serves and see if you can hit in a couple aces?
All I want to do at that time of night is get back to my hotel and rest and come back the next day and do it again. It's funny. Everyone says the same thing about the U.S. Open, the night matches, those late night matches. And I'm there every night and I don't leave until we're done. You get to those matches at 1 a.m., 2 a.m., there's only about 500 people in the stands. So all these folks who are saying, I love it and I would never leave, and I don't know where they are, but it's certainly one of the things that's unique about us. We introduced night tennis, and the players talk about it too, as one of the unique experiences in our sport. And we hope to continue to do that. I'm spacing on the first part of your question though.
It was the Davis Cup and team.
Yeah.
The team approach.
It's really interesting. Tennis, unfortunately, is incredibly fractured as a global sport. So you have a men's tour, you have a women's tour, you have 4 Grand Slams that are all independent entities, and then you have the ITF, the global federation, running the Davis Cup. And the demands on the players are really hard. I mentioned earlier the PGA Tour. One of the great things is you have all the best players in the world here in the US. And the reason they do that is they can earn a lot of money, and the quality of life for them is much easier. They can travel, right? It's 3 hours to the next tournament. It's half a day. But tennis, you're playing all over the world. 1 week you're in Shanghai, then you're in Australia, then you're in Europe, you're in the US, you're in South America, you're all over the planet. The physical demands are so hard, and it's difficult to ask the players to compete in these international competitions on top of everything else that they're being asked to do. So they've changed the format. The Davis Cup format used to be 4 times a year. You'd have sort of national matches, working your way to the finals. Now they've condensed it to it's 1 week and you play it all. I think that's a positive. I think that will help keep some fan interest. It'll feel more like a World Cup in our sport. They're doing the same. The women's version of the Davis Cup now is the Billie Jean King Cup, which was just renamed from the Federation Cup just this year. And so there's some challenges. There's some challenges there with player participation. And one of the opportunities for us as a sport is to do a better job with our schedule, so that we can all get the best players in the world competing against each other more often. I think that's what fans want to see. And if we can work together more closely, maybe we can figure out a way to create a schedule that allows for that. And the Billie Jean King Cup and the Davis Cup will be absolutely part of that mix, and should be. They're neat national competitions. And if you talk to any of the players who've competed, much like players who go to the Olympics and the like, right, they will tell you some of their proudest moments in the sport were participating, representing their country in those events. But we ask a lot of tennis players today, and that one's hard. There's no prize money. There's not necessarily ranking points, and they're independent contractors.
I tell you what, it sounds a lot like the golf world. We want to thank you, Lou, for spending the night tonight with us. You get to go home a lot earlier than if it was a late match. Thank you, everybody. Don Kent for joining us. We will be back in 2 weeks with another sterling, fantastic guest. Hope you'll be there with us. Any closing comments? Should we talk a little bit more about Tom Brady? Sorry, Lou.
No, go ahead.
I'm just all over Tom Brady. I just am.
Go
I
ahead.
will leave you with this thought. One of the reasons I love Tom Brady, by the way, Sally Jenkins wrote a great article in the Washington Post today about him. But this is a guy who keeps his scouting report from when he was going to the combine. Too skinny, too slow, not a strong enough arm, puts that in his locker and looks at it every day. You got to say it's definitely inspiring. Everybody, if I don't have Tom Brady next week, we'll let you know. We're just going to cancel.